And so it's just like, you're not making the connection here because this vulture career you hate is what she loved. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about the book To Die For by Joyce Maynard, published in 1992, and I am comparing it with the movie directed by Gus Van Sant, which was released in 1995. But for those who have not seen this movie, I thought it was fantastic. I would recommend it. Nicole Kidman is perfection. Also, Joaquin Phoenix is incredible in his role. And then I really liked Casey Affleck as well. His role is smaller, but he, again, was perfect. And by the way, Casey Affleck, while working with Gus Van Sant on this movie, he handed the director a script that his brother and their friend had written, a little thing called Good Will Hunting. So it is thanks to Casey being cast in this movie that Gus Van Sant went on to direct Good Will Hunting, and we all know what happened because of that. History was made. Anyway, so that's some fun trivia. Apparently Damon and Ben Affleck also auditioned for the role of Russ, but yeah, Casey is the one who was cast. And also, Gus Van Sant had worked with River Phoenix a few years prior. And then I assume, because I read, they were trying to find someone to play Nicole Kidman's character. They were casting for the Casey Affleck character, for the Lydia character. And yet I never read about anyone else being considered for the role of Jimmy, which Joaquin Phoenix plays. So I wonder if he had gotten to know Gus Van Sant through River Phoenix knowing him. And so is that how he secured this role as Jimmy? I would assume so. Your net worth is your network, after all. But on a sad note, River Phoenix would have died very shortly before filming this movie began, so that's sad to think. But yeah, as far as my spoiler-free thoughts, I really enjoyed both book and movie, and I would recommend each of them, and from here on out, I will just get into the plot details, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And I'm actually going to begin talking about the real life events that inspired the author to write this book. And so in the afterword, she makes sure to say, this book is fiction. Some of the events that happen are very similar to some real life events, but she's like, I did not know these people. I just made up the story based on what I saw on the news, which kind of makes me feel bad for the parents of the real life guy who was killed, because this movie came out shortly after the real events that inspired this, right? And even though it's like, oh, this is fiction, it's very heavily inspired. And so I feel bad for the parents seeing marketing for this movie so soon after their own son was killed. So that I always feel conflicted with stuff like this, because I'm like, oh, that seems in bad taste for them to make this movie so soon after his death. I did want to say, though, there was a movie that came out in 1991, just 1 year later, starring Helen Hunt, called The Pamela Smart Story, Murder in New Hampshire. So this was being used for entertainment purposes even before To Die For came out. So when Pamela Smart was 22, she began a relationship with 15-year-old Billy, who she then manipulated into murdering her husband, Greg, with the help of some of his friends, meaning Jimmy. So Jimmy and some of his friends killed Greg because Pamela manipulated him into doing it. And ultimately, all of them were arrested, and Pamela is serving a life sentence. She is still in jail. And to this day, she maintains that Billy acted of his own accord and that she tried to end it with him, and he was angry and jealous, and that is why he killed Greg. Whereas Billy and the others, they did go to jail and they served sentences. However, they have all been released and are on lifetime parole. And so Billy was let out about 15 years ago now, and he currently lives up in Maine and tries to live a very private life. By the way, guess what the name of the town is where Pamela, she grew up in this town and then she moved away and then she came back and she was living in this town with her husband, Greg. The name of it? Derry, Derry, which is kind of a crazy coincidence. And it was in New Hampshire, so it's near Maine. But yeah, they lived in Derry, New Hampshire. So interesting. As a fan of Stephen King, right? That's an interesting little factoid. But now to move on to the fictional story, the fictional counterparts. So Suzanne is the Pamela, and in both, she is clearly a narcissist. But I did want to say that even though the author, Suzanne is clearly a horrible person in both book and movie, but I thought the author of the book specifically did a good job at still showing the sexism a woman had to face who wanted a career, right? Who valued a career higher than children. So even though we don't like Suzanne and we see how she's willing to exploit any and every type of thing in her life in order to get fame, and yet at the same time, you can also sympathize for her as a woman who wants a career because her husband, Larry, wants to have kids. And yet, it's easy for him to be pushing kids on them when it's like, you're not the one who has to carry them in your stomach. You don't have to give birth to them. And it's not expected of you to give up your career to raise them. And yet that's what he's asking of Suzanne. And he just assumes like, oh, as a woman, she'll just want to let go of her career in favor of kids. Like that's just the way it is. And so he is not accepting, like in some ways he was supportive. And yet when it got to a certain point, he was like, time to have kids sometime soon. And so she has to tell him repeatedly how she does not want children right now. And she does, she's not even open to being pregnant and is thinking like maybe they could adopt in the future instead. But yeah, he just keeps pushing this on her and he keeps telling people like, oh, her mother instincts will kick in. Don't worry. Like as a woman, it just naturally kicks in at some point and she'll realize her career isn't as important. And so, yeah, the author points out what an uphill battle this is for Suzanne and the uphill battle women face. But again, we also don't like Suzanne and she's willing to exploit anything and everything. And I want to read a few sections. So these are from Suzanne's perspective. The way I figured, so long as we were adopting, there was no rush either. I wouldn't have to take time off for pregnancy or worry about getting out of shape and then having to work so hard to get the weight off like Joan London did. Plus, if we adopted in a place like Romania, maybe we could pitch our experience for a half-hour special. Bring along a camera crew, let the viewers at home live through the whole process, start to finish. I bet if we did something like that, the phone would be ringing off the hook at the station with people wanting to know how they could do it too. And at another point, I may not be some bra burner, but I'll tell you this. Nobody gets on a guy's case because he knows he's good and says it. If a guy tells his boss he deserves a raise or a more responsible position, it earns him points. But you take someone like me, and just because I'm petite and blonde, I'm supposed to be some shy, retiring little decoration in the corner, never make any waves, never going after any more than what people give me. So when I didn't behave that way, they called me a ball buster. And both book and movie have the scene where she goes to like a media newscasting convention. And in the movie, it's during her and Larry's honeymoon. And so in an interview, they're saying something about like, oh, she was so good to him. Like she agreed to go to this spot where they had a lot of sailing, even though she had no interest. Like that's how selfless she was. When really we see that she wanted him to go off sailing without her, with her giving the excuse that she didn't want to be in the sun or she gets seasick, whatever, when really she wanted to go to this convention that she knew was happening. So I'm sure she planned their honeymoon in this location specifically for that reason. But here at the convention, an older man is taken with her, and later on at a table, he propositions her basically by telling her a story about a woman who is now successful and on TV, but how she had to perform sexual favors in order to get where she is. And it seems heavily implied that Suzanne does sleep with this man, but there's room for doubt as well. And we see her later almost use this same method of offering herself to the guy who was in charge of the local station job. However, at the last minute, she decides not to, and she rips up the paper, and so she doesn't go that route, but she still does get the job. And so again, this is another thing of showing the sexism, like the fact that if a man was applying to this job, there would be no expectation at all in any way that he would need to sleep with someone to get ahead, right? And yet with a woman, sometimes, obviously she didn't have to do that here, and obviously that's not true for every case. And anyway, the fact that it's even something that could be slightly considered, it shows the sexism. But also the scene when she is with the guy at the table at the convention and he's telling her this story, it also shows how naive she is because he's not giving it to her straight and she is not understanding what he is saying, and he has to spell it out for her to understand. And it's interesting because obviously she starts out fairly naive, still very self-centered and narcissistic, but naive. However, through the course of the movie, she loses all of her naivete and has become totally cold and ruthless. And in the movie, we also get a clear moment when she has the shift in her mindset that she needs to get rid of Larry. And we see her begin to act differently with the kids as she sets her plan in motion. So it happens when she has returned from her job, where one of her duties is to report the nightly news. And she comes home and Larry is still awake, and he sits her down and he tells her how she needs to stop wasting time at this station, and reporting the weather is getting her nowhere. And he wants her to help with this new idea he has at the family-owned restaurant that his parents own that he works at. And so she feels he demeans her, and he's trying to force this life idea on her and also trying to push her into having children. And so we can see that this is the moment when she realizes, like, wow, I need to find a way out of this. And again, from here, we see her acting different with the teenagers. Whereas in the book, we don't get a clear-cut moment like this. And so therefore, it's hard to say when she started faking it with the teens, because she allows Lydia into her intimate life very early on. But when it began to become manipulation is hard to say. And her experience at the convention was different in the book as well, because this was not during her honeymoon. It was just, regular life. She traveled out of town to go to it. And then later she's talking to Lydia about it and saying how she talked with this older man and talking about the news and media. And she was like, oh, and we were on the same wavelength. And it made me realize how unsuitable Larry is for me as a partner. And he just doesn't understand my world the way this man had. But then we hear later from this man, and he says that they did not sleep together because at this point, like, the guy's kind of a scumbag, and he's saying how, like, oh, these women who want to make it in the industry and are willing to sleep with you, they're a dime a dozen, and yeah, sure, she was pretty, but she was nothing special. And at that point, he also was just so over sleeping with young women at these conventions, because at this point he had done it so much. And so that's why he claims that he didn't sleep with Suzanne, because he was kind of tired of that. But then in the book, so as far as the murder goes, they had planned it for a specific night. And so Suzanne and Lydia are out at the mall, making sure the public sees them, while Russ and Jimmy go to the condo. However, Suzanne's dog is home and starts barking at them. And so they quickly use that as an excuse not to go through with it. And so Suzanne, of course, is very upset. And so the next, not the next night, but the next, however long later they decide to do it, she has the dog be scheduled to be at a kennel, and she is out of town at a job interview. Whereas in the movie, we just get that first night it is planned, and it goes through the first time it is planned, which in the book, I did like that we get this initial scene where we think it'll happen and then it doesn't, because it was sort of early enough on in the book that I was surprised it was happening at that point, considering how much I had left in the book. And so for us to realize, like, oh, it's a false alarm, I thought that was a nice touch, but I understand why the movie cut it. But in the movie, the night they planned for it to happen, it makes Suzanne look even worse than she did in the book, because she has them do it the night of her first anniversary. So she and Larry had been at their anniversary party, and then from there she goes to do the nightly news weather report. And that is when Jimmy and Russ show up at the condo. And so she is doing the weather broadcast the same moment she knows her husband is being killed. And in the end, she wishes him a happy anniversary. And you can also just see the coldness within her showing through, which is portrayed by how the camera shows us her face. But also her boss seems to be getting like the willies while he is watching her. And so I did think that was well done. Also, I love seeing Wayne Knight in movies. It's kind of crazy how many movies he was in. He's had quite the prolific film career, if you think about it. But anyway, I always feel like I need to shout him out since I'm a Seinfeld fan. And of course, he's fantastic as Newman. But I should say, for those who don't know the story, so she gets a job at a local station and she is always presenting ideas to her boss, but he keeps turning them down. And when she comes to him with her 100th idea about interviewing some teens over the course of months and asking them about hot topics and then releasing it on TV, like an expose on what it's really like to be a high schooler in today's day and age. And her boss has been saying no to so many of her ideas that he finally is just like, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that one. And then the 3 teens who sign up are the ones who she later gets involved in her scheme. And so to talk about the less important of the 2 teenagers, I will talk about Jimmy next, but the other 2 are Russ and Lydia. And in the movie, we see that all 3 of them are already friends, But in the book, Lydia signs up on her own, and she wasn't friends with Russ or Jimmy prior to this. And over the course of them working on this project with Mrs. Moretto, she forms a crush on Jimmy. However, Jimmy, of course, is infatuated with Mrs. Moretto. And even when they start sleeping together, he still calls her Mrs. Moretto, which is just so gross on her part, obviously. But in the movie, all three of them sign up individually. And so Jimmy, he's just genuinely wanting to do this. So he signs up, as does Lydia. However, in the movie Russ, he has the most attitude of all three of them. In the movie, he is forced to sign up because he was disrespectful to her during her presentation. And so the teacher, he's like, don't you know that her in-laws have mafia connections? So in order to make it up to her and make things good, you have to sign up. So that is why Russ joins. Whereas in the book, Russ signs he and Jimmy up as a joke. And while Russ never takes it seriously and often won't show up, Jimmy, despite not choosing to be part of this, he actually gets into it and gives sincere answers. And Suzanne also has a talent for making people feel seen and making them feel valuable and makes them feel like they're capable of something more, right? And so all three of these kids come from poorer families who don't have many options. And so finally getting to know Suzanne Moretto, Lydia and Jimmy finally start to feel like maybe I am capable of more than what I've been raised to believe. And of course, the sad part is that Suzanne, she's just a great BSer, right? Like, of course, we don't know when this turned into manipulation, especially as far as the book goes, like I said. But still, she was just great at flattering people in order to get what she wanted. And so it's like, how much of this was her being genuine and how much of it was her just being a great BSer. And so it's sad because these kids truly did need someone to take an interest with them and to help cultivate their wants and dreams and desires. And so they think they find that in Suzanne, only for her to then misuse their trust, obviously, in a huge way. And in the book, we learn more about each of the pasts of these characters, like how Russ comes from a line of inbred hillbillies, kind of. Or I don't know if hillbillies is the right word. But anyway, he comes from a very poor family that has a lot of inbreeding, and his parents don't really care about him and don't expect much of him at all in life. And so when he's arrested, they literally don't care because they were just like, well, we knew he would go to prison for something at some point. And even though the movie doesn't get as detailed, I did think they still did a good job showing his crappy home life through the footage that Suzanne films when she is at his house. And then Lydia also has a bad home life, but with her, we learn that in both book and movie, her stepdad molested her when she was only 12. But then she tells Suzanne in the movie that she threatens this guy, and this puts a stop to it before he then leaves her and her mom. Whereas in the book, this had gone on for a couple years, which is horrible. And eventually he just up and leaves the mom and her for whatever reason. And the mom is really sad that this guy has abandoned them. But Lydia is grateful because obviously it was a horrible experience, and yet she never felt like she could tell her mom what he was doing to her. And this type of abuse towards children is something that, like, an author or a filmmaker can't, in my opinion, like, they shouldn't just toss this in a story unless it serves an important enough purpose. And if they give it the time it deserves, like, it can't just be this passing detail because it's like, oh, like, that is so upsetting and serious that you need to spend a bit more time with it, I think, in my opinion. And I did think Joyce Maynard did a good job with this in the book, and it did serve a purpose because it shows us how fragile and unprotected Lydia is and how her mom isn't someone she can rely on. And so it shows why she gets so attached to an adult who finally takes an interest and seems to care. And she also tells Suzanne about this in both book and movie. And in both, Suzanne is like, you just need to block that from your mind and pretend it never happened, and then you'll be fine. So that's her advice, to just shove it down deep and act like it didn't occur. But again, I mean, there's so many tragedies in this story, obviously what happens to Larry, but also these three teenagers, like I said, they needed someone to show up who really did care and had the time to invest in these kids, because Jimmy, his mom does care about him, but she also is a single working mom who had him as a teenager. And so they all could have benefited from an adult who took them under their wing sincerely. And so it's just so sad the way they were so easily taken advantage of. But then, yeah, with Jimmy, you know, like I said, we learn more about all of these characters in the book. But in the book, his mom got pregnant as a teenager and she was going to get rid of the baby. But then almost on a whim of sorts. She just sees this children's baseball game, and there's a kid up to bat who no one thinks is going to be able to hit the ball, and yet he does hit the ball. And so because of that, she's like, you know what? I'm going to keep this baby, and I'm going to try to give him the best life I can. And she also is like, having a baby, like, this could be the most important thing I ever do in my life. Like, there's rich people who pay thousands of dollars to try to have a baby. So why am I here about to get rid of it? And so that is why she ends up keeping him. And she does try to give him a good life, but she also becomes pretty jaded the older she gets, realizing that the world is rigged against people like her and her son because of the background they come from. And again, we don't get any of these specific details in the movie, but I thought they still did a good job showing how his mom does care about him, right? And she's not apathetic when he gets arrested, because in the movie, when he gets arrested, she is sobbing. So just that right there shows that clearly his home, it's very humble, and yet clearly he has a mom who does care about him. But Jimmy in the movie, he is smitten right away. Whereas in the book, he and Russ make comments about Suzanne being attractive, and it's always very derogatory. And then later, when Russ stops showing up, Jimmy actually feels good about himself, right? Because Suzanne is building them up. And so he starts to give genuine answers to her questions, and he starts to actually care about this video project. And he fantasizes about having sex with her, but of course, he's not thinking that it would ever actually happen. But then in the movie, Suzanne invites Jimmy and Lydia over once she has started hatching a plan. And when Lydia is out taking Suzanne's dog for a walk, she and Jimmy have sex for the first time. Whereas in the book, it's a little different because she and Jimmy are hanging out at this boardwalk place, and they have some beers, and then she gets a tattoo on her breast, and afterwards she shows it to him. And then from there, that's how it all begins. But in both, she does have Lydia join them at different times so that people won't speculate that something suspicious is going on. And in both, we see how she manipulates Jimmy through sex to get what she wants. And in the book, we hear more about how he feels like an addict and he's willing to do anything to be with her. And she tells him, oh, I love you and I want to be with you, but Larry's in the way and he won't let me divorce him. Plus, he also is physically abusive with me. So really, murder is the only way. So if you love me and if you want to be with me forever, you need to help me with this. And she also convinces Lydia, Jimmy and I were like Romeo and Juliet. You need to help us. And then she also will tell Lydia, you can be my assistant in the future. We'll always be best friends and you can help me in my career. And I'm going to take you and Jimmy to Disney World when this is all through and we can just be together forever and all very happy. And of course, they're gullible teenagers who are also very vulnerable due to their backgrounds, on top of just how young they are, and so they fall for her lies. But in both book and movie, the gun they use, they get from Lydia because her mom owns one. And in the book, there is a great scene where after Larry has been killed, Lydia's mom is watching the news and she hears about Larry's death and she says something about oh wow, so many crazies out in the world. I'm glad that we have a gun here at home to protect ourselves with. Not realizing, of course, that very gun is what was used to kill this man. And I thought that was a great scene in the book. But in both, when Russ and Jimmy are holding the gun to Larry, Jimmy is frozen and he can't shoot. And so Russ is telling Larry, give me your watch, give me your necklace, whatever. And then he says, give me your wedding ring. But then Larry is like, oh, I can't do that, man. My wife would kill me, which was such a sad moment. And then from here, Jimmy pulls the trigger. And in both, we see how after all of this, Suzanne thrives on the attention she is getting from her neighborhood who wants to know what's going on, as well as, of course, from the news reporters. And I thought this was great in the movie because the whole family is there at the apartment. And then suddenly she sees these bright lights show up and she's in a trance being I'm going to be on TV. And it reminded me of Sunset Boulevard, right? I'm ready for my close-up. And then the way she and her parents, how they explain her love of being on TV despite this tragedy and how she is able to stay so calm. They explain it away being I'm so cooperative and calm because I'm used to this line of work. As a future reporter, I understand that they're just trying to do their job. And so I just want to help them. And I'm so calm because I'm just, I've practiced staying calm in traumatic situations for my future job as a newscaster. And so that's how she plays it off. And of course, her parents totally fall for it. However, the detectives find too much suspicious about this whole thing. And in the movie, they even confiscate the recordings she had made for her video project because some of that was very telling. Whereas in the book, this was different because the station manager, he watches what she had completed because she was basically done with it. And he says how she actually did a great job with the editing and he was very impressed with it and how he can't air it for legal reasons. But he's like, oh man, I wish I could though. Like imagine all of them in one video. Like I would make so much money if only I could air that. And so again, just showing how he wants to benefit from this tragedy and how he's sad that he can't make more money by airing these tapes. But in both, eventually, the cops wire Lydia and she meets up with Suzanne and she tries to get Suzanne to admit that she planned the whole thing. And Suzanne does show her true ruthless colors, but she never straight up admits to anything. However, everything put together is still damning enough that they do arrest her and the boys. And in the book and movie, Jimmy, he ends up serving a life sentence. And in the book, we end with him and he's saying that, like, you know what? I've counted how many times she and I were together, and it was 14. I traded my life to have sex with her 14 times. And he says how now so much time has passed that he can't even remember what she looked like. And so just, again, he gave up his life for this woman who now he can't even remember what she looked like. And it was only for 14 different interactions with her. But Suzanne herself, when she is arrested, they pay her bail. And then later, she is being interviewed by the press and she tells them that Larry was a coke addict and that the two boys, they must have been drug dealers because they come from the wrong side of the tracks and they were, dealing drugs probably. And so she says that it must have been a drug deal gone wrong and that's why he was shot. And Larry's parents at this point hate Suzanne and think she was involved in the planning of his murder. And when they hear her say this about their dead son, they hire someone to kill her. And in both, they're Italian. And we had heard rumors in both that they have mafia connections. And it kind of comes across as people just making an Italian stereotype, connecting them to the mafia. And yet we find out that it was true. And so they hire someone to kill Suzanne. And then the cops in the book, they find Suzanne's body in a lake and they know that she was dead before she was put in the lake. And yet they're like, you know what? The Morettos have been through enough. We just want this to end for their sake. So they claim it was suicide and that Suzanne had drowned herself. Whereas in the movie, we don't get this specifically where the cop admits that he lied for the sake of the Morettos. Rather, we see, even before the murder take place, that the cops eat at this restaurant and we see them at the restaurant again in the end. So clearly, it's implied that the cops are chummy enough with the Morettos that they know what happened and yet they cover it up for them. And then in the end, Lydia is the one getting TV deals all over the place. And so when all is said and done, Lydia is the one living Suzanne's dream of being famous. And granted, Suzanne does have a type of fame. However, she's infamous, plus she's dead, so she can't even benefit from this fame she now has. And then to move on to my final thoughts. So first of all, in both book and movie, it has them on different TV shows, meaning the parents after this has all happened. And in the movie, the TV show they are on sharing their experience is called The Laura Show. And my name is Laura, so I thought that was kind of fun. And then also in the book, at Larry's funeral, she plays the song, "You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings," which isn't totally inappropriate. It's a pretty self-centered song to play, and yet you can also see it is kind of fitting though too. Whereas in the movie, they have her play the song "All by Myself," which again, this movie is a dark comedy. And so this scene was kind of hilarious in a dark way. And then in the end of the book, we get a section where Suzanne's mom is saying how she hates reporters and how they've preyed on Suzanne and falsely accused her through all of this and are just using her story to make money. And we read, "I'll tell you what I think of television reporters. They're the scum of the earth. They're vultures. First they tear your heart out, then they play it back for the world to see on the 6 o'clock news." And yet, she still sits there saying that Suzanne is a great person and that she was wrongly accused. And so it's just you're not making the connection here? Because this vulture career you hate is what she loved. Doesn't that reflect poorly on her? And yet, the mom chooses to stay, and the dad chooses to stay so blind about who their daughter was. And so, yeah, I just thought that was, again, another fantastic line in the book. And this is a theme that I also just enjoy reading about. Like, there's something so fascinating about people who refuse to believe the truth of who someone is. And I've talked about this many times, how it's often, parents, like Suzanne's parents, not seeing the reality of their daughter. And then it's also a common trope with husbands who don't see the reality of who their wife is. And we get that here too, right? Because Larry keeps telling people, oh, she's so sweet, she's so fragile, she needs protection. And someday, pretty soon, she's going to want kids. Like, you'll see, her mothering instincts are so great. Look how she treats that dog. So again, he's seeing what he wants to see rather than seeing the reality of what she actually wants in life. Also in the book, we hear how much she loved heavy rock music, and I thought the movie did a great job playing rock music throughout. And yeah, it just shows like that friction between the facade she presents with who she really is, right? Because the way she looks, she doesn't seem like someone who would be jamming out to rock metal music, and yet she was. Also, something else the movie took from the book and executed really well is the interview nature of the book. So in the movie, we get an interview section from Suzanne where she's talking to the camera, but this we find out in the end is a video recording she is doing of herself in her home. And then we also hear from the parents while they're on the Laura show, and then we see other people who are also interviewed for this TV special insider look type of thing, including Jimmy, who is interviewed sometime later from his jail cell. And then mixed in with these interview sections, of course, is just the movie itself. And this is how the book is set up, where each chapter is from someone else's perspective and it's them like talking to an interviewer. And so in some ways, I liked this. However, I think the book Big Little Lies utilizes this method better because we get interview sections mixed in with the actual story happening. And so I preferred that, whereas this book just entirely is made. It's entirely comprised of these interviews. And so it was a unique way to write the book. And yet I think the way the movie took that and used it worked even better. And then again, the way the book Big Little Lies was done, I think was also a better way to do the interview format by just having it sprinkled in. And then when it comes to which one wins, so honestly, I would probably give both of them the same star rating. And there are certain things with the book that we didn't get in the movie that I really loved. And yet I think I'm going to say that the movie wins in large part because the performances are so fantastic. And I really liked the camera work we get going on. And I thought they did a great job bringing certain things to the screen and like their use of the metal music, the use of the interview style. But then also, just Nicole Kidman was so good in this, as was Joaquin Phoenix, like I said. Everyone was just fantastic. And so they really brought this story to life in a very vivid way. And by the way, this role was first offered to Meg Ryan. However, she turned it down, or there was something going on, so she didn't end up being in it. And so Nicole Kidman, she called the director directly and was like, hey, like, I really want this role. And so they talked about it on the phone. And she had been in a number of movies, and yet she wasn't obviously the Nicole Kidman we know of today. And so, this was a big moment for her to get this role. And she was nominated for a BAFTA, but not an Oscar. And by the way, the Meg Ryan connection, the movie In the Cut, that was offered to Nicole Kidman. She turned it down and it went to Meg Ryan. So we got a little reversal. But the fact that this is based on the death of a real man, as well as not to mention the Billy guy, the Jimmy counterpart, right? Like, his life was ruined because of what this woman did to him and what she manipulated him into doing. And so a life was taken and other lives were ruined. And yet here they are making a dark comedy about it. Like, again, I'm just like, is that in the best taste? Especially, if this movie came out today, I would probably feel different. But because they made it so soon after the real events, like, it seems kind of messed up. And yet I did enjoy the book and the movie. While reading the book, I didn't know this was based on a true story. It wasn't until the afterword where she mentions, she alludes to the fact that there were real life events. That's when I learned. But by the way, also in the afterword, I like how the author says that there is a part of herself in every character in this book. And I like that too, because this book has a lot of people we don't like. Suzanne is the worst of the bunch, but there's other characters too we don't particularly like. And so I love that the author is like, I'm in all of them. She's admitting that even the negative characters, that's me too. And so I love the self-awareness, right? Like she's not trying to act like, oh, I can't relate to Suzanne at all. Like, no, she's like, yeah, there's a part of me in Suzanne too, you know? So anyway, having that sort of relation and empathy for every character. Again, this is something I've talked about in relation to Stephen King, how he has said that he usually can understand the perspective of everyone he writes from. And I think that's how an author makes believable characters who feel so fully fleshed out, is because they're not one-dimensional, because the author themselves can understand where the character is coming from. So anyway, I did think this book was well written. So it is a close call, but maybe my love for Nicole Kidman is just winning out because I think she's fantastic. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.